In this video, we're going to begin with a part we created in one of the Getting Started tutorials, which is the shell sign that you can see on the left. We're going to make edits to this design in order to ultimately end up with the fish sign that you can see on the right here. During the process, we'll look at adjusting the model size, importing new 3D clip art, editing the text, distorting vectors and components, and finally creating a 3D texture from an image. Once our edits are complete, then we'll show you how to change the material and recalculate the toolpaths for the new design. So let's open a new copy of Aspire to begin. So let's click on the icon to open an existing file, and from the project folder we're going to open a copy of the file that we created in the Getting Started tutorial. Let's just hit open. What I'm going to do is just review what we did in this original tutorial. So let's tile the windows so we can see the 2D and the 3D view. Here you can see the layout we created with our components for the sign and the text that we made. We also have the vector outline here that we use for the toolpath boundary. If we click on the icon to go over to the Toolpaths tab, we can actually go ahead and look at the toolpaths we calculated. You can see them in the toolpath list. We could click on the Preview Toolpaths button and just ask the software to preview all toolpaths. So that'll just run through the list in order. First toolpath is the roughing, which we can see there. Second toolpath will be the finishing. Third toolpath will be the VCarve text into the top of our banner, and then lastly the profile toolpath to cut the sign out. If we double click there, we could remove that, and that is our original part. I'm just going to click on the button here to reset the preview. I'm going to close this and click on the icon to go back to the drawing tab, and then click to go back into the 2D view again. Now we're going to work through the edits we want to make to our sign. We're going to start by making the design larger. In order to accommodate that, I need to make my job space larger as well. So I'm going to come up, click on the icon to set job dimensions and origin. I want to make my finished sign 18 inches by 12 inches, so I'm going to set my job size to be 19 by 13 to give us a bit of a border around the outside for our profile toolpath. I'm going to leave my material settings for the moment because I don't know how thick this may end up, and so I can adjust that at the end when we come to recalculate the toolpaths. Leave the XY datum in the lower left, still working in inches. I'm going to specifically scale the size of the part in a minute, so I'm going to leave this unchecked, and to give us a little bit more in terms of the quality of the model to play with, I'm going to up the resolution to high. I'm going to hit the OK button now. Software will warn us that we need to recalculate all the toolpaths because we've changed the size of the part, so I'm just going to hit OK. I am planning to do that later anyway. Next we want to scale up the data within the job. So I'm just going to look on the layers drop down to see if we've got any other layers that have data on that we might also want to scale. And you can see we've got layer 1 and layer 2. I'm going to switch on layer 2 so we can see the vectors we've got in there. I'm going to hit close, and I'm going to delete this cross section vector. I don't need to re-sweep my cross section, so I'm going to hit the delete key with that selected. Then I'm going to click and drag a box to select all my vectors and all my components in the part here. If we want, we could tile the window so we can see the 2D and 3D view. And now when we come over and click on the icon to set selected object size, I can come into here, change the width to be 18. Because I want the height to be exactly 12, I'm going to unlink the XY and I'm going to type in a value of 12 for the height and hit apply and close. And then with everything still selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to align selected objects and choose the option at the top here in order to align it horizontally and vertically in the center of our work area. And we can come down and hit close. Now let's just click in the background in the 2D view to deselect everything. And then the next task that I want to do is replace my shell component with a different piece of clip art. So I'm going to come onto the modeling tab, I'm going to select the shell, and I'm going to right mouse click and choose the option to delete. I also could use the delete key on the keyboard. Then I'm going to click on the icon to import a component or 3D model, and in the project folder we'll find another piece of the vector art 3D clip art that comes with Aspire called Leaping Bass, and we can just hit open. That'll be imported. I'm going to center that in the middle of the job, so we'll click on the icon to align selected objects, click to center it in the middle of our workspace and close. And then with the fish still selected, I'm going to click on it again to go into the transform mode. I'm going to go to the corner node here, and I'm going to hold the shift key down, and now when I click and drag in order to increase the size, it's going to increase that around the center of the part because I'm holding shift down. And I'm just going to increase it so it still fits inside of the inner oval. Next, with the transform handle still up, I'm going to click on the hard blue node on the corner here, and we'll click there and just drag that around in order to rotate the fish, and then just click and move it up in the design here. And you can just keep adjusting this until you're happy with its position, or you could also align it in the center, click align, align center again, and close. Now we can see at the moment that the fish is at the bottom of the list here in the component tree, and that's just being added onto everything above it. So we can see that the tail is just being added on to the top of the banner there. What we'd like to happen is for the fish to be added to the dome shape, but then for it to merge in with the banner here. So what I'm going to do is just take that component, move it up in the list so it's the second one down, and now what's happening is we've got the dome with the fish being added to it, the border being added to that, and then the banner merging in with everything else. Now although the fish tail is still sticking through the banner a little bit now, we can edit the height of the banner later in order to make sure that the fish tail goes completely under it. Before that, I want to change the text that we machine into the banner, and then we're going to distort the banner and the text to give it a little bit more of an interesting shape. So let's select the text by clicking on the vector. I'm going to come down to the drawing tab. I'm going to come up and click on the icon to draw text, and that will pick up the fact that that's a text entity and that originally we created it in a limiting box. So now what I should be able to do is just change the font and type in new text, and it should still fit within that same area. I'm going to click on the drop down for the font, and the font I want to use is called Georgia, so I'm going to hit G on the keyboard. That'll automatically take me to the first font beginning with G, and then I can just come down and select Georgia. If you don't have this font, then just pick a choice of your own that will create the sort of text that you'd like to have in the design. Once we've selected the font, I'm going to come up to the text and I'm going to type Lakeside Cabin, all in uppercase letters. I'm going to leave this set to bold. Got the bounding box dimensions in there. The characters are set to stretch within that bounding box, so if I hit apply, we can see that's replaced that in the same area. Now we can hit close. Let's just maximize the 2D view, and we can see if we look closely at that particular font that it's got some overlapping letters in it. Remember, most fonts are set up for printing, not for CNC machining, which is why you sometimes get these overlaps. What we need to do if we see this is either merge the shapes together or space them apart, because when we come to calculate toolpaths, overlapping vectors like this can cause problems. In this case, I'm going to space them apart. So with the text still selected, I'm going to come up and click on the icon here to edit text spacing and curve. What this means is I can come in between the letters that I want to change the space for, and if I click without holding anything down on the keyboard, they get closer together. If I hold the shift key down and make sure I've got the cursor between the L and the A here, and then click, then it's going to make them further apart. So I'm holding shift down and clicking in order to space those out. I'm going to come between the A and the K now and click twice in order to space those out. Between the K and the E, click twice to space those out. As we come along our part here, we can see we can actually make the S and the I a little bit closer together. So I'm going to let go of shift and click, and the same with the D and the E. Not holding shift down now, I'm going to click a couple of times to move those closer together. Coming down the word between the A and the B, I'm going to hold shift again, click twice to space those apart, and then between the B and the I, just click twice to move those further together. So you can see we can kern the spacing of all our letters using this command here, and whether we hold shift down in order to space them further apart, or don't hold shift and click to move them closer together. Once I'm happy with the spacing of my letters, then we're going to come over and click back on the selection mode arrow to exit out of our text spacing function. Let's go back up and click on the icon to tile the windows so we can see the 2D view on the left and the 3D view on the right. And now I want to distort the component for the banner and then distort the vectors for the text. We can't distort a 3D object and a 2D object at the same time, they have to be done separately. Because that's going to change the outline of the part, I'm going to come in here and just delete this outline vector here. So I'm going to select that, hit delete on the keyboard. Now I'm going to select the banner here. I'm going to come down to the modeling tab. I'm going to click on the icon to distort selected objects. I'm going to make sure the bounding box option is checked and hit apply. This will create a bounding box around the outside of our banner. Then I'm going to hover over the top portion of my bounding box here so I get that little wave underneath the cursor there on the screen, and I'm going to hit B on the keyboard to turn that top edge of my bounding box into a Bezier curve. That's added these handles you can see here. Then going to come over the bottom of the bounding box and hit B again in order to change that into a Bezier curve as well. Now I'm going to click and drag a box to select these two handles on the curve. I'm then going to click on one of those, and holding the mouse down I'm going to move it up in order to add some curvature into that part. And you can see as we adjust the 2D there, the 3D model is updating to reflect our changes. Now I'm going to click and drag a box around these two handles here. Then I'm going to click on one of these, and holding the mouse down I'm going to drag these two down in order to give our banner kind of an S shape there. And I could keep adjusting these either together or individually until I'm happy with the way that they look. At that point I would go ahead and click on the option to bake distortion, hit OK to tell the software it's OK to bake that, and that will have baked that into a new component. Now I can select my text, and again with the bounding box option checked here I can hit apply. Once more I'm going to come over the envelope. At the top I'm going to hit B to turn that into a Bezier curve, over the bottom of the envelope and hit B to turn that into a Bezier curve. Now we may want to just maximize the 2D view so we can see this a little more clearly, and I'm going to start by selecting all four of these nodes, clicking and just moving them up so that they're roughly in the middle of the edge of the banner there. And then I'm going to select these four and do the same. Next we'll grab these two, again just dragging a box around them, click on them and just move those up. Grab these two, click on it and drag that down, and once more we can keep adjusting these either together or individually until we're happy with the curvature they're following on our banner. So again we might just take these, just tweak that up, take these, tweak that down a bit more. As I say, we can just keep working on these until we are content with the design. Once we are happy with that, we can also hit bake distortion in order to bake those into a standard set of vectors now, and hit close. And these are now going to be individual vectors, no longer text, because we've distorted them. And so at this point I'm going to select them all, just drag a box around them, click on the icon to group those selected objects, and that'll just make it easier for me when I want to come and select those when we start to calculate the toolpaths again. Let's click back on the icon to tile the windows vertically again so we can see the 2D and the 3D view. And now what I want to do is adjust the banner height so that it comes above the tail there. So I'm going to select the component. We can do that from the list or click on it in the 2D view. We click on the icon here to change the properties of the component, and I'm going to change the height of this, and let's maybe make it 0.6, hit the space bar to apply that, and then we can see that's just added enough height for the banner to stick out above the top of the tail. If we wanted a bit more difference in there, we could just increase that height further. Happy with that, so I'm going to hit close. Now the last thing I want to do before we think about recalculating the toolpaths is to add a texture into the background that follows the dome shape going between this inner edge here and the edge of the fish. We're going to create that texture from an imported photograph. So let's come up and click on the icon to create a component from a selected bitmap. You can see there's a couple of different photos that I've taken here, one of some tree bark, one of some stones. We could use either of these. In this case I'm going to click and choose the photograph of the stones and hit open. Now that's automatically created a grayscale in the 2D view and added a 3D component to our component tree and displaying that in the 3D view as well. With that component selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to set the selected object size. I'm going to check link XY. I'm going to enter a width of 17 and hit apply and close. And then I'm going to click on the icon here to align the selected objects and click to align that in the middle of the job there. Let's go ahead and hit close and take a look at what we've got. If we look in the ISO view here, we can see that that component is just laying all over everything else we've got in the model. While we edit this, I think I'm just going to switch off some of those other components for the moment. So let's come into the component tree, click on the check mark here to undraw all the components, and then we'll just switch on the stones component there. Now when you import an image and create a texture from it, you'll pick up a lot of noise within that image, unless it's a very clean file that's been created in a graphics program. So any digital photo you'll tend to find will have this sort of speckling or an orange peel texture on it. So normally the first thing we do with a texture is to smooth it. So with that component selected, I'm going to click on the icon to apply the smoothing filter, and then in here we'll let that calculate and we'll just slide that up to around halfway, and you'll see that'll clean up a lot of the noise in the image there. So maybe a little past halfway, I'm going to hit OK. And the next thing is that the software's automatically assigned Z height to this based on the white areas being high, the black areas being low, and everything else scaled in between. But because this height is automatic, you normally want to go in and check the size of that. So if we click on the properties icon, I can see that's nearly 0.3 of an inch thick, which is quite large. So I'm going to shrink that down to 0.1 inches, hit spacebar to apply that, so that we've just got this nice kind of 3D texture that will go into the background of our sign. Next I'm going to hit close, and what we want to do is crop our texture so it is inside the oval here, and then we'll need to crop it to the outline of the fish. So again, with this component still selected, I'm going to hold shift down and select this inner oval vector. Hopefully you can see that. Maybe if we maximize that, you'll see that running around there. Let's go back to the tiled view again. So component first, shift and select that inner oval vector second. Then we're going to click on the icon to clear area of selected component so that we basically cookie cut that back to the oval shape. Next I'm going to switch on my fish, and we'll see that that appears in the 3D view, but we can't see the grayscale for that in the 2D view here. And that's because the stones component was created more recently, and so it's prominent over the top of the grayscale for the fish. There's a couple of ways that we can adjust that. If I just click to deselect my oval and component there, I could either send the stones to the back or bring the fish to the front. If I right mouse click on the fish component, then we can go to 2D preview, that's the grayscale that we see in the 2D view, and choose the option to move to front, and now we can see that's just changed the order of them. Now I'm just going to click to deselect that, and what I want to do is select the object that I'd like to trim. I'm then going to hold shift down and select the object that I want to trim it to, and this time I'm going to choose the option to trim out the area under the second selected object. So this is going to clear the area of the texture under the fish. When we click on it there, now we can see that that's not overlapping anymore. Now if we take a look in the 3D view, let's just maximize it there, we can see that we've trimmed the texture to the fish. But we can see because it's a raised up shape at the moment, we're getting some vertical edges here where the edge of the texture is higher than this part of the tail of the fish. So what I'd like to do is drop that texture down. I still want it to add on to my dome though, so if we switch on the dome here, we can see at the moment we'd have the dome plus the fish plus the border, then the banner, and then the stones would be added to everything else. So we do need to change the order of this because I don't want the stones to be added over the top of the banner. So I'm going to click in the list at the bottom of the list to deselect my components, select the stones component, and then click on it and just move it up so that it becomes our third component. Now, as I said, I want to move this down so that it still follows the shape of the dome, but that it's not fighting with the edge of the fish here. So with that component selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to change the properties. We already adjusted the height of this to 0.1, and what I'm going to do now is just drop it down 0.1 of an inch vertically. So I'm going to put in a base height of negative 0.1, hit the space bar in order to apply that, and now we can see we've got that negative edge with our texture inside of it that's being added to the dome, and because we cropped out the inside area, that's leaving the fish sitting on top of the dome as well. If I went ahead and switched off the fish, we can see the shape we've created between the dome and that texture, plus the fish, then plus the border around the outside edge, and finally with the banner merging in over the top of everything we've got within the design. Let's just close the component properties there, come back up, click on the icon to tile the windows so we can see the 2D and 3D view again, and I'm just going to click in the background to deselect the component. At this point, we've made all the changes that I'd like to make, and we're ready to go and calculate toolpaths based on our new design. Before we do that though, I do need to make sure that I have a vector I can use as the boundary for my toolpaths and also as the vector for my cutout. So I'm going to select all my components and click on the top one, shift and click to select the bottom one. I'm going to click on the icon here to create vector boundary from selected components. That will take all the components we've got selected and create a new silhouette vector around the outside of our design. Now with that selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to switch to the Toolpaths tab, and before we recalculate the toolpaths I need to double check my material setup. If I click on the set button, I can see if we look down here that the model thickness is a little over 1 inch at the moment. Now I could come back and make edits to that if I want, or we can just go ahead and make sure that our material thickness is large enough to accommodate it. So I'm going to enter a material thickness of 1.5 inches, Z0 off the top of the block still, XY datum lower left, and then I'm going to add a small gap above here, so round about 0.05, 0.6 of an inch, just to give us a little bit of space above the job to allow for any inconsistencies in our material and how flat our material is. Next we're going to check the rapid gaps and the home start position, make sure they're safe for the particular setup we have on our CNC, make sure they're high enough to avoid any clamps or other obstacles above the material. If they look good, then we can hit the OK button. The software will tell me we need to recalculate all the toolpaths because we've changed our material setup. We were warned of that earlier. Now I'm going to hit the OK button, and what I'm going to do is select the roughing toolpath, click on the icon to edit that toolpath, and what I want to do is make sure that I select the vector, the new vector we created. This toolpath would still be associated with the vector that we deleted, so nothing was selected when we went into it. I want to check everything else just to make sure it still works from the new size and shape of our part. So I'm happy with the 0.25 inch end mill. I'm going to hit the edit button and check the parameters for this, and it may be, if our material allows, that we want to up our pass depth so that we're cutting 1/4 of an inch into the material on each pass. I'm going to keep the other parameters and hit OK. Machining allowance looks reasonable, roughing strategy, boundary vector offset is OK for that tool and that machining allowance, and so I'm just going to hit calculate in order to recalculate a new toolpath based on those parameters. Software has automatically opened the preview page, so we can come up, click on the button to preview selected toolpath and double check our new roughing to make sure that looks OK. So there we can see, if we maximize the 3D view, how that's going to rough into the part. Let's go back to the ISO, up to view, tile windows vertical again. Going to close the preview toolpaths form, and it's worth noting that if you do plan to machine this yourself, you need to ensure that all the values you're entering for the material setup, the toolpath parameters and the tooling are appropriate for your particular CNC and the material you're planning to use. Next, I'm going to select the finishing toolpath, click on the edit toolpath icon. Again, we need to make sure we select that boundary vector. I'm going to check the tool, so I'm going to use a 1/8 ball nose tool in order to finish machine this. Click on Edit. Happy with the parameters in there? We may, if our material allows, up our feed and plunge rate, hit OK. Boundary vector offset looks reasonable for that tool, so I can hit Calculate again. Software will take a few seconds to generate a new toolpath for us based on this design. Now we can preview the selected toolpath and take a look at that to make sure it looks okay. Again, we want to maximize the 3D view, just zoom in a little, rotate that around, and that's looking pretty good. The fish has got good detail, the tool's getting into the texture, into the background there, and my machining surface quality looks good too. So I'm going to come back up to View, tile the windows vertical again, close the Preview Toolpaths form. This time we're going to recalculate the V-carve toolpath. Now I've been selecting the toolpaths and clicking on the icon here to edit them, but we can also just double click them within the list. So if I double click this, then it'll open that and allow me to edit it. In this case, I can check the parameters, make sure they look reasonable. I need to select the new vectors that we want to V-carve into the job, make sure it's still set to project the toolpath onto the 3D model, which it should be here, and hit Calculate. And then again, we can preview the selected toolpath, maximize the 3D view in order to take a look at that text. Again, if we're happy with that, let's just go up to View, tile the windows vertical, and finally we'll just close the Preview Toolpaths, double click the profile, select the vector, and just hit Calculate in order to regenerate that toolpath that's going to cut out around the outside of the part. Maximize the 3D view, click on Preview Selected Toolpaths, and I can see at this point I should have been a little more careful in checking the parameters for that toolpath because it hasn't cut all the way through. Luckily, I can see that straight away within the preview, so we can hit Close. I can double click on this again, and you can see that our original cut depth was set up for a thinner piece of material. So I need to change this to 1.5 inches. If I want to, I could check the step down parameters for the tool. That looks okay. We're cutting outside the vector and hit Calculate. And that's just really an example of how it's worth double checking everything before you hit Calculate and not just rushing through and assuming everything will be right for a new design. This time, if we hit Preview Selected Toolpaths, we should see that cutting all the way through the material. We could double click on the waste material here in order to remove it from the job, and then we can see what our finished part's going to look like when we actually run those toolpaths on the CNC, assuming we do all our setup correctly on the machine. To save the toolpaths, we would just close the Preview Toolpaths form. We'd select the first toolpath in the list, click on the icon to save the toolpath, check at the top to make sure we have the right one selected, then check the post-processor. If you've previously run jobs with the software, then this should already be selected with the correct option. Otherwise, you just click the down arrow, choose the right option from the list here for your machine tool or your control software, and then click on the Save Toolpaths button, giving it an appropriate name and hitting Save. Once we've done that, we'd select the finishing, check at the top here, click on Save, give that an appropriate name and hit the Save button, and then repeat for the V-carve and the profile toolpath, and we'd have all the data we need then to run this part on the CNC. If I go ahead and just close this now, I'm going to come up, go to File, Save As, and we'll save this file. We'll call it Fish Sign TP, and so there we'll have a version of the file with all our edits in and the new toolpaths we calculated, and that'll be in the project folder. Before we conclude, let's take a moment to summarize what we've looked at in this example. We began by opening a file we created in one of the Getting Started tutorials, where we'd laid out a sign that had a shell in and a banner, 2 pieces of clip art and some other simple components we'd modelled, and a set of toolpaths we'd created to cut it. We took our design, increased our work area size, and then scaled up all the vectors and the components in the part. We then changed the piece of clip art from the shell to the fish, edited the text, and then used the Distortion tool to change the curvature of the 3D banner and of the 2D text that needed to follow it. Then we imported an image and used that to create a texture in the background of the sign that went between the inside oval edge and our fish. Finally, we generated a new vector boundary, went back over to the Toolpath tab, rechecked our material setup, and then worked through and recalculated each of the toolpaths in turn, checking them in the preview to make sure that they were correct. So there you've seen how powerful the editing tools are in the software to take an initial design and to make a lot of changes to it in order to create something quite different at the end. That concludes this video.